everyone.
Good evening.
Welcome to the Chapel of the Chimes and Oakland Heritage Alliance's 2024 lecture series. So, on behalf of the Board of Directors, my name is Amelia, and I see a lot of friendly faces here. There are members of the Sutter family here tonight with us. Glad to see that. And for everyone who is thinking about attending the Partners in Preservation Awards ceremony this coming Sunday afternoon at the Scottish Rite Center, please turn out. We have got a really dynamite lineup of astonishing projects and wonderful individuals to introduce to you. So tonight it is my immense pleasure to introduce two of my favorite people on the planet, Brenda Montano and Dave Zuckerman, from the East Bay Regional Park District ex officio. And Brenda can mostly introduce herself. I like to say she came about 21 years ago and was given a bunch of dusty old file cabinets, which she has now made into a world-class history center for the Park District with electronic archiving of imagery and valuable documents stored, and those are made available to the public by appointment to enjoy a lot of the background on the regional parks that we love. Dave Zuckerman is often fondly known as Ranger Dave. He is a Berkeley guy, grew up in Berkeley, UC Berkeley alumnus, go Bears. And Dave worked for many years at the Tilden Environmental Education Center, running the Junior Rangers and being an all-around hike leader. And he was also a fire lieutenant for the East Bay Regional Park District. And they eventually kicked him upstairs and made him a manager. But for the past several years, he has been enjoying history. And I will let him come up and tell what he knows about Mr. John Sutter, who many of us knew. And first of all, let's bring up Brenda Montano to talk about the work she does with the Archives and History Center. So give it up for Brenda Montano.
So, hello everyone. I am happy to be here and happy to see everyone. And I'm trying to think if I need my glasses on or off because I can't see the stuff. So I'll take them off. And again, Amelia has introduced me as Brenda Montano. My title now is the Archives Program Supervisor. The title's only 2 years old. And that's 2 years old for the Park District as well. I did start at the Park District in 2003. I wanted to be a park ranger, but I ended up as secretary for the Public Affairs Department. And we had a basement there at the headquarters building. And I mean, I've been in the archives now for a little bit, so I know this story is kind of common, where they discover that these records that have been in the basement and been underneath a water pipe that's been dripping and leaking on them, that they were the founding records for the Park District. And these were records from the 30s up until the 1950s. And I don't think anyone was realizing the stories that were hidden in them. And we kind of had our general story of being founded in 1934 at the Park District, and just some general history that we found is not entirely accurate. But that has been the fun of the last 20 years of finding different, more accurate information and using these archives. So in 2005, so just 2 years later, I was charged with going through all of this and a lot of the records, and I didn't have to. I mean, at that time, I was allowed to kind of do something. If I got all my work done, I could say, "Hey, can I go to the archives and look through the files?" And that's when I met Jerry Kent, and we can never not mention Jerry Kent with the archives. at the Park District because it's him, and it was his passion, and he was worked at the Park District for forever. He started in 1964 and retired in 2003. At his retirement, he was the AGM, Assistant General Manager, and he was one of the only Assistant General Managers. We have 5 or 6 of them now, and 2 Deputy General Managers. So the Park District grew extensively during this time. He was very interested in all of the records, and our first job was going through all the 35mm slides, boxes and boxes and boxes of 35mm slides. Then all of a sudden people started getting really interested in what we were doing, and the news got out through all of the passionate staff at the district who had stuff at their desks. Retirees started coming out, and we would just get boxes delivered to the archives, which was is still now at the Trudeau Archives, the Trudeau building that's up at Reinhardt Redwood. But meanwhile, I'm still working my job, planning events, doing public affairs stuff, managing the budget, and but I had a really supportive leadership team that helped make me feel okay about spending extra time at the archives. But we didn't have a job for that yet. The 75th anniversary came around for the Park District. This was 2009, and that's when the archives really started to be a necessary thing for the Park District. 75 years is significant for the Park District, and that is when people started saying, hey, we need the history, we need the pictures, we need the images, we need the stories, and that's when things kind of took off. So years later, in 2020, I got my job as Archives Program Supervisor. I had to apply for it. In 2022 was our first budgeted year, and I've just, for the last year, I've just gotten my first full-time staff person. So we're a staff of 2. We have 73 parks, so it's all the cultural records of all 73 parks, and then plus 90 years of history with the Park District. So we can't do it all, and part of that is acknowledging the volunteers. So not just Jerry Kent, who came to volunteer after he retired, but I ended up with a volunteer crew of at least 15 volunteers, and most of them now have spent 10 to 12 years with me at the archives. And one of them is Amelia Marshall, and a recent is Dave Zuckerman, although I did work with Dave Z for quite a bit before he retired. And the 80th anniversary was kind of big. We had to do a big project on the Olmsteads, Frederick Olmsted Sr. and Frederick Olmsted Jr. And that really started this teamwork between Dave Z being the one to tell the history and tell the stories in a very relatable way. And of course, he's a great speaker, and he's a very engaging speaker. So I'm looking forward to hearing him talk about Judge John Sutter. So after that, I just wanted to say that for the archives, for me, I didn't have any archival background at all when I first started working at the district. The district helped with that, sent me to trainings. I attended the Western Archives Institute, that's part of the Society of California Archivists, and I'm also constantly attending conferences and workshops to stay up to date. It's doable. I think, like, if we think about Judge John Sutter in the story we'll hear, is that things do take time, and even for my own growth, realizing that it takes a lot of time. But it's amazing to get to a point. I don't know what it's going to be like further in my career, but it's amazing to be at a point where I feel comfortable with this history, huge, massive amounts of history. I'll say that for most of us, our passion is pulling out these stories, using the archives. We have oral histories, we have photographs, We have, correspondence and historical records that you look at it and you're just like, okay, well, that's just this, and then no, but it's more. It tells a bigger story. Is that my time? It might be, but so I just wanted to say with John is that he was a board member while I was at the Park District, and I got to know him very well, and that says a lot for him as a board member. He was very personable and very. You were somebody in his world, and he recognized almost all of us, the employees, and made us feel like that we were heard. I do think that that's something that we'll hear that Dave will talk about as well. I also had the fortune to meet his family, and of course Ellie Sutter, and just somebody who was always there every event, every time for John. So we always knew that they were together. That was it. And I helped with the dedication of the Judge John Sutter Regional Shoreline, as well as and worked with the family with the memorial service. It was very special to me, and I just think that that's good, something to think about. I do want to mention this really quickly. I hope I'm not taking up too much time. I think I'm okay. I just attended a conference, and there's a lot of concern about always telling stories that have to do with white men, and I want to acknowledge that, and that we're aware of that history. But John was really special, and I think he was really aware of those issues. I always thought that he was, and I think like the most important thing to remember with this in his contributions is that we have parks now that have a lot to do with his activism, a lot to do with his need to have places for children to play and have access to, and especially along the Oakland shoreline. And that is really, really significant for him. I'm going to hand this off to Dave Zuckerman now, and I hope you enjoy the presentation.
Thanks, Brenda. Thanks, Amelia, for that introduction. Okay, I guess I will stay here. I like to walk around a fair amount when I do this, but I'll try to park myself in here. So, hey, good evening. I'm Dave Zuckerman. I had a long Park District career. While I was working as a park naturalist and even as a manager and doing events and writing materials and delivering programs first full-time and then part-time, I always wanted to be able to have more time to research, to explore, to delve into the history, to find the connections and start putting things together. And when I retired, hey, I had time to do that. And so I had, as Brenda said, we worked together quite a bit on events. And when I could, I would sneak up on a Wednesday morning and say hi to Brenda and her team. But now that I'm retired, I get tapped for these kind of things, and I enjoy it. So let me say this. So I'm going to jump in, and I know we're on a tight time schedule, so I'll try and take about 40 minutes, 35, 40 minutes or so, and leave some time for questions as well. So this is probably a question with a lot of answers, but I guess I find myself wanting to know how many folks here knew John, had met him, worked with him, were acquainted with him. So maybe about half. So I want to just kind of say at the outset that it's very humbling and kind of daunting to both be here and purport to be the one who can give you the story of his life in 30, 40 minutes. when so many people probably knew him in a deeper way. But at the same time, I did know him. I worked with him a lot. John liked to hike. And the kind of funny thing is, I would run into him over the years on different trails. Mostly when I happened to be leading my over-the-hill staging. I remember what a Nedgedly staging area in Carquinez Strait, ran into him. I came to the top with my group on a hot day, and there was John with his hiking group, and we chatted. John was friendly and interested, and actually they have a little bit of a personal connection in that, as we'll find out, or as most of you know, he spent a lot of time in Oakland City Hall in various capacities, or at the courthouse. And my dad was a long time Oakland employee. He was a city planner on the 6th floor. And somehow he knew John. So when I started working for the Park District, John was like, hey, I know your dad. And I always felt like we had a little bit of a bond. And that's why I'm taking the liberty of calling him John in this show, in this talk. What else did I guess the other thing I wanted to say, just tagging on two things that Brenda said, is one, what I've done here is really tried to cull or curate the collection in the archives on John Sutter. So that's the way I approach this. Kind of, this may be sort of an interesting, odd thing to say, but, here we are in this funeral home, but, I hope this doesn't sound weird, but, I've been pretty busy, but the last couple of days, I've just really immersed myself in John Sutter's life, and I feel like I have been spending time with John, and it's actually been a very satisfying journey for me, and it has turned it into a labor of love and trying to play around. So there's some technology in here, so we have a lot of pieces with a lot of chords, so technology permitting, you'll get to see this. And the other thing Brenda was talking about her conference and what she was, learning and kind of cutting edge, trying to tell all histories and not just the dominant history. And yes, John Sutter, like me, was an older white male, wasn't always older. But, as I hope to at least touch on, something John did as early as the 60s and the 70s is, he was really an environmentalist before it was a thing. And he also reached across a lot of barriers, a lot of fences. And so to promote his causes, starting in the city of Oakland, he was working with lots and lots of different community groups, particularly the Black community, to save San Leandro Bay. So let us jump in, and I have John speaking for himself a fair amount in here. I think probably about 6, 8, 9 minutes in a variety of short clips. I was struck by his words, his eloquence, how articulate he is, and so I can tell you what I think he said, but I will let him tell it himself. And I want to start with this, actually. So as Brenda said, and most people know, he was a board member for many well, not many, but a couple of decades. Here he is with Beverly Lane, another cherished board member, and then a previous board, including Whitney Dotson, I think there on the far right. And, for anyone, I don't know if there's any district employees in here, there's a couple in the front. But for those of us who have had the pleasure or the honor or the terror of presenting to the full panel there, there was something kind of good and bad about having John on the board. What was good is you knew that somebody was paying attention, laser attention, on what you were saying. If there were written materials, he had read them. And I thought that this little passage that I read from a guy named Rick Rickard, who John appointed to the Parks Advisory Committee some years ago. Rick is a bike nut and an Oakland activist. And I guess he spoke, I was not there, but he spoke at the memorial. And he said this, and I just think it captures. It's kind of a funny thing to start with, but okay, so I can't read from over here, so we'll try this. let's see if this works. So John was quiet and understated, but behind that genteel front, he was always thorough in his analysis and understanding, remembered details, and had a knack for asking that one question that would go straight to the heart of the issue. That is so true. But more to the point, I'm sure, this is Rick says, I'm sure if you talk with Park District staff who are here today, they will likely recall at least one occasion where following a presentation, John said something along the lines of, hey, when this topic came up 3 years ago, you mentioned these 3 steps you would be taking. Has that happened? How's it working? And that is so true. That was a great thing. First short clip. All right. First technology glitch. I guess the thing went to sleep. All right, stand by for take 2. Should we try it again?
I think it's important.
All right, oh, we're getting closer.
You're getting closer.
All right, I'm scared to press it, but I'll try.
I think it's an important human value to be able to enjoy nature, to be close to nature, and increasingly it's more and more difficult.
I think that played most of it. So you mentioned the Junior Rangers. I used to lead the Tilden Junior Rangers, which started in 1947. I wasn't there that year, but I did work with it for probably 15, 20 years. And we met in an old funky building with a screen just like this and 12 extension cords, and like this reminds me, like I haven't had this like old school tech for a long time, but anyway, let's just pay a little bit of mind to the legacy that John and his family are leaving behind, and the biggest one that I can think of is the regional shoreline that bears his name, Judge John Sutter Regional Shoreline. So who has been there? Wow, right. This is very impressive. So when they opened it, sadly, it was in 2020, so they did a virtual dedication, which was pretty good, but hey, it's nothing like being there. And you probably know this because I'm preaching to the choir, but these are the footings, some of the footings from the original Bay Bridge that they left for precisely this purpose. And here's a view looking towards Treasure Island. Here's the pedestrian bike path. And then the park actually includes this historic building known as the Bridgyard Building. I'll have a couple of slides in a moment just to kind of pay homage to the amazing history of this particular point. And you know, this as Brenda alluded to, and John will say a couple of times, his persistence and time are really key ingredients in environmental activism and conservation. And this was taken in 2016, where obviously the sign shop has kind of made the sign for publicity purposes, and then they're going to probably go back and put it in the warehouse. And here we are with Bob Doyle and Mike Anderson. Bob Doyle was the GM. This is 2016. So it's just, you know, it's still 4 years before it opens, but they're at some kind of event. I'm not sure what. Now, this is kind of a shameless plug here. I wasn't going to put this in here, but then I was reading the oral history that was done by UC Berkeley of John Sutter in 2013. And I came across this line where he was talking about my dad. So I was like, okay, I guess it's part of the history. So this isn't, so the interviewer asks him what he thinks about this bike trail and how involved he was with that. And the bike trail touches down right next to Judge John Sutter Regional Shoreline, but it's not technically part of it. It's part of the bridge, it's part of Caltrans. And this is my brother and me at the opening of it because it's named after my dad. And so he recognizes, he says that's something that the East Bay Bike Coalition did, and Alex Zuckerman, who founded the East Bay Bike Coalition. And then he just shows his attention to details. Like, hey, Dave, his son, works for interpretive staff. So I'm like, okay, I'm in there. And I think it's worth pointing out, I mean, as I said, he loves to hike. I think this was Crockett Hills, did you say?
It's Carquinez Street.
Carquinez.
Hewlett Moorbeck.
Hewlett Moorbeck. Oh, got it. So Ellie and John have passed away, but their legacy continues because they made a bequest to the Regional Parks Foundation. And recently there was a bunch of work done renovating the Roberts pool in Roberts Recreation Area. And my understanding is this Sutter bequest helped pay for that. And it struck me as I was thinking about Roberts and the connection. I forgot, I got enough pictures in here, but you know, Tommy Roberts, who's the namesake for Roberts Park, was also a man who was instrumental in Park District history and also loved to walk. Tommy Roberts actually, I don't think, drove anywhere, just walked it everywhere. And he was on the original board, kind of an amazing guy. Here's the history I promised. So you probably know this, but this before there was a bridge, there was a little electric train that took you out here to a ferry terminal. Here's looking at it towards San Francisco. Here's the train. And you would jump on a ferry to go to San Francisco. You know, the historian Charles Wallenberg, who did a lot of work on Berkeley and Bay Area history some time ago, would say, like, I think during this era, like, we've never beaten the commute since then. It's only gotten worse, not better. And this is, of course, is part of the key system. And I think it was called the key system just, I forget why, but I think the route, the lines, the map are supposed to look like a key. Am I right, Daniel? Yeah, all right, so I kind of dig this key symbol, but here's the system. And what's kind of cool is, like, if you take public transit, like, you're not in a hurry, like, I take a lot of public transit, like, some of these lines are the same lines, like the F line or the 7 that goes up Arlington. These are the old key system bus routes. It's just kind of a cool thing, I think. And then the other thing that happened out here, huge thing, was the Oakland Army base. And so that had to close and get decommissioned for anything else to happen here. And here's John, the story here and the layers of history with what was, with the efforts to get Gateway Park into place are really multidimensional. And here is Judge Sutter talking about Gateway, and he refers it to as Gateway because that was kind of the working title for quite a while before they finally settled on
And
this.
then since I've been on board, I took the initiative to suggest that we have the Gateway Park, which will be at the touchdown of the Bay Bridge on the Oakland side once all this construction ends, and the Park District is proceeding with that. We've gotten a promise of a conveyance from the federal government of this old Oakland Army base land to have a park right out at the entrance to the bay.
So, yeah, as I said, there's a few more dimensions. So in 1997, he goes to Pat O'Brien, the then general manager of the Park District, and he goes there with Doug Seiden, who was the board member, fellow board member who represented mostly Alameda. And he says, I explained I thought this was an excellent site for a park, that it had great views of the bay, the bridge, San Francisco, Yerba Buena, Port of Oakland, opportunity to watch birds. Pat, and I thought this was interesting, just a side thing, Pat, like, he really goes on in his oral history how Pat O'Brien just was all in. So Pat enthusiastically agreed. Then Bob said, where's the money coming from? So Bob was he would have been the AGM, I think, of land acquisition at that time, or chief or something. But it goes back, and you may have read this, I think we put it in the blurb, but look at the vision, which is why I called it vision and purpose. I mean, look at the vision of John Sutter. 1967, as president of an organization that he helped found in the early 60s, he has the vision. He says, while the area just south of the Bay Bridge is held by the Army, its possible eventual release and public use for recreation should be contemplated. With good views and good access to the water, it could be usefully developed and provide an attractive gateway to Oakland. And that became the vision for all those years. And he kept it going. And so John believed in parks, but I think he especially believed in urban parks, parks for the people in the city. And he especially believed in parks for Oakland. And we're going to talk a little bit about San Leandro Bay in a minute after we hear some advice. And there was a story I didn't put in here, but there was a bond measure called Measure CC, I forget what year. And John was actually kind of not into this bond measure because it was a carve out. And he didn't like this. And what a carve out was is a tax. The East Bay Regional Park District is a taxing authority, right? So it has taxes for the two counties. But for Measure CC, they sort of cherry-picked a little kind of more liberal region that they thought would support this tax measure. And that region was kind of Richmond, Berkeley, Oakland, down to somewhere, San Leandro maybe. And John ended up supporting it, but just was sort of a little bit, he sort of felt like, look, why should, a certain group of people have to pay for parks? Like we don't do that in other places. But he said there's not enough for Oakland in here. And when they agreed, it turns out that when they agreed to throw Tidewater, Martin Luther King, which would have been San Leandro Bay shoreline, there was a Tidewater area that he wanted to see developed. And so they threw that in there. And in fact, that was built. And there's a picture a little later of him at the dedication. And I was the interpretive and recreation manager for a while, and that was part of my bailiwick. And so I didn't know. I wish I'd known that story. But here, the interviewer's asking him, like, hey, you've been at it a long time. What would you say to people that want to advocate for the environment, for a cause?
Well, I think what works is tenacity and persistence. You can't just you can't just do it as a sort of short-term issue. A lot of issues go on for years. Developing this park here at San Leandro Bay was an effort that went on for about 10 years, from the beginning of agitating about it to the time finally the resolutions were passed that calling for the development of the park. And that's true of many of these campaigns, that they go on for a long time. So you have to keep at it, and you have to keep at it even though it gets kind of tiresome after a while. You have to have organization. You have to have other organizations, a variety of organizations that are interested. They may not be large organizations, and often they're just a handful of people, but they can make a difference. So I believe that government does bend more than people think. A lot of people have the idea, I don't vote because it doesn't make any difference. But it does. It's not just voting, but going to council meetings and talking to elected officials and sending in letters and all that. Those things do make a difference. So I kind of believe in our system, and I believe that you have to work the system, and you have to work the system effectively.
What do you think? He practiced it. If you read his history, it's amazing. So he mentions, in fact, that interview out the window behind him is present-day Martin Luther King Jr. Shoreline. It's down at the, what do we call that? The Freedom Center, the Shoreline Center, little reservable facility. They're in there, and they actually have to stop now and then because it's right next to the Oakland airport. They have to wait for these planes to go by. But that's where they're doing the interview. And so he's talking about this, and he really, I don't know if it's fair to say he cut his teeth on this struggle, but it was a big struggle. It was a long struggle. It took about 10 years to get this park built. And in his histories, everywhere you read, a lot of times he'll tell a conservation story, a struggle, And he'll always end by saying, hey, if you go there today, there's a park there. Snow Museum in Oakland, right below San Pablo Reservoir. We'll get to that. And Martin Luther King. So this is John Sutter in '71. This was actually a campaign photo for his first run at the Oakland City Council, and he's looking out towards what was there at the time. And so this is a few, probably 2.5 minutes or so, and he's telling the story, and I think it's pretty compelling myself.
But this area used to be all marshland. And this was an area where there were lots of birds. It's an important stop on the Pacific Flyway. Audubon comes out here every year with a bird count, and had done that for years, I don't know, starting probably in the 20s or 30s. But anyway, I came out here one Sunday in 1964, and the port was busy filling up what had been this marshland. And what they were trying to do was to fill in as much land as they could before BCDC was created. The BCDC proposed legislation was an issue at that time, and there was a commission in effect to decide whether or not the legislature should pass a bill to control bay fill along the San Francisco Bay shoreline. So various agencies, including the Port of Oakland, were busily trying to fill in as much as they could to be grandfathered in. And that's what the port was doing. And I was just appalled that it was very sloppy, it was poorly done. They were bringing in old construction material with rebars sticking out of pieces of concrete. And really ruining what had been a very attractive, well, I don't know if they're attractive, but interesting and important areas, way I put it, and certainly important for wildlife. And I thought that was really something that shouldn't happen. And I went down to the Board of Port Commissioners and went to one of their meetings, and I protested. And one of the commissioners said, oh, this guy is interested in something called ecology. ECOLOGY, which shows you, they weren't interested or knowledgeable or anything. That was kind of an indication of their mindset. So it was, and at the same time, as I was president of what was then called Citizens for Regional Recreation and Parks, and we were one of the groups advocating for the creation of BCDC. And then when BCDC was created, I was on the board. I was one of the additional appointees by Governor Brown. And I had an opportunity then to look at it from the other side.
I had the opportunity to look at it from the other side. I mean, so here's a guy who's gone and preaches, going to meetings, writing letters, going door to door, having your voice heard, and now he is on the other side. He is on the very first inaugurally newly formed San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission. And it wasn't all smooth sailing, but they did get the Port of Oakland's attention, and they stopped a lot of filling, and I think in some ways maybe they had to get a little more sneaky about what they did do, because there was a big controversy about a corporation yard for the city of Oakland that I think ultimately went through, but things changed. Actually, they changed until Ronald Reagan was elected, and then the port was able to kick off several people, including Mr. Sutter. So he lasted 2 years on that commission. It was a political kind of a
You
thing.
mean elected governor?
What did I say?
Elected.
He was elected governor, thank
No,
you.
You're meaning to say when Reagan was elected governor
Yeah.
and not president.
No.
Yeah, I think you're right. Thank you for
67,
pointing that.
1967, I think.
Yeah, thank you. That's where I'm living in the oral history.
Right.
So you're right. Thanks for pointing that out. It wasn't president, it was governor. It's about right, 60, would have been 67 exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so now we'll just kind of go through just a few kind of milestones of John Sutter's life, and this is just really me pulling out from the archival material. So he was actually born across the bay in San Francisco, but he's very careful to correct Laura McCrary, the interviewer, and say, no, I wasn't raised in San Francisco. He says it twice, we lived in Burlingame. But his dad, right in the beginnings of the Great Depression, he moves the family to Oakland, and he starts a paper box company. And apparently, John never says the family never wanted for anything, but at the same time, it was stressful for the father, and he often didn't know if he would make payroll. And he also was developing some health problems, and so things are a little touch and go, I think. And I forget, I didn't commit it to memory, but I think his father died when John was, I'm wanting to say around 16.
Yeah.
Thank you.
His daughter.
Oh, you're Maria. Hey, Maria. Whew, I'm glad I've been seeing you nod your head on a few things. I loved your dad. He was a great guy. So this is interesting. I didn't have room or time to put all the stuff in there, but John Sutter had a lot of interests. He actually says, look, I wasn't a good athlete. I was short, and I wasn't going to do that stuff, but I figured out you got to go with what you're good at. And he was good at like reading and writing and speaking. And here is the governor, Governor Earl Warren, giving John Sutter, I know it's blurry, but here at age 16, he wins this award for the Hearst American History Contest for writing a paper. So this is like in high school, and he's on the debate team, which he continues into college and apparently has a lot of success on this debate team. I really enjoyed it. And it's interesting that he said in his oral history that he kind of figured at around age 12, like, I want to be a lawyer. And the best way to get there is by going into, I want to go into politics, I'm sorry. And the best way to get there is to be a lawyer. And so that he had a game plan from early on. And, I'll talk about the college in a minute, but I was really struck that, it wasn't a silver platter. Nobody gave him a blank checkbook and said, go to it, buddy. He worked in high school trying to set himself up so he would have money when he got to college. But he first went into the Army. And this was, as he says, he spent 18 months there, and he knew that when he applied to Harvard and I think he applied to Harvard. He may have applied to other places, and he was hoping for a scholarship, but they were very, very rare at that time. So he went into the Army for the money, for the GI Bill. And this is kind of interesting because he signs up for he goes into the Airborne, the U.S. Army 82nd Airborne, and the interviewer says, hey, did you know what you were getting into? And he goes, no, I didn't. The recruiter told me that the Airborne would be an exciting experience and I'd fly around. He didn't say anything about jumping out of the airplanes. But he stuck with it. He did it. He said he could have quit, but he didn't. And he didn't do that the whole 18 months, but he did that. I think he was training in South, there's a base in South Carolina, I think, or Georgia, I'm not sure which. And, I'm sorry I'm compressing a lot, a lot of family life and that people have lived, and I'm just kind of fitting in here. But just some things that struck me in reading his oral history, a couple things is he goes to Harvard, and he said the thing to do in 1940, late 40s, if you were an Oakland High kid and you wanted to go to college, is you're like 99% you're going to go to UC Berkeley. And that's where he thought he would go. And in fact, he ended up doing 1 semester there. But he won, there was a San Francisco Harvard club of some kind, and John won an award. I'm not quite sure for what, probably for writing a paper. And they gave him some money, and it wasn't enough to just have a smooth ride, but it was enough that it convinced him to go there, and it paid for the basics, like the tuition, and I think perhaps room and board and books, and and not enough that he didn't have to. He worked very hard. He worked on his time off. He worked on his weekends, and he did a bunch of stuff, including selling encyclopedias door to door and doing fuller brush, which is something my dad did for a little while before he became a city planner. And then this kind of blew my mind. I don't know if anyone else thinks this is just, I just admire the initiative, but he graduates from Harvard and he takes a trip down to Washington, D.C. And he wants to be a politician, right? So what does he do? He goes to Congress. He goes into the Senate. And I don't know how he did it, whether he just started knocking on doors or what, but he goes and he talks to a couple of senators. And the interviewer's like, how do you do that? He goes, well, I just want to see if they're there. And people would talk to him, so he did that, and then he came home. He went to Stanford Law School. That's where he met his future wife, had 3 kids. He begins work in the Alameda County DA's office. And then for a while, for some time he was in private practice, and he did all kinds of law, and he was trained in all kinds of law, but he mentions sitting in his office one rainy day and wanting to go do something. And he's like, nope, better sit here by the telephone, because he had developed a specialty in landslides. And so he knew if it's raining, it could be some landslides. But that sort of, I think, at least in my telling of it, is sort of overshadowed by the impact he made in the world as an environmental leader and advocate. And here's a couple of the things. Runs as an environmental candidate for City Council. Just a couple of the flyers and news articles. Oakland ecologist wins. This is him being sworn in to his first term. And then I'm teaching right now part-time, just for fun, kind of over at Merritt Community College. Welcoming 2 of my students here in the front row next to Brenda. But I just threw this in because it's kind of interesting. I hadn't really tracked on that Peralta group started in '62, and John decided to run for board or of trustees in '62. Didn't quite make it. It was a crowded field, and he wasn't an educator, but he ran. So that was interesting. And then let's just kind of, as we draw to a close, just some environmental advocacy, just some key benchmarks. Really the first thing that he mentions is this area here. So this is the very tip of San Pablo Reservoir. This is the San Pablo Dam, and this is this little small community that's at the base there. And San Pablo, well, I guess this is San Pablo Dam Road right here. El Sobrante is down here. And in '58, they become aware that East Bay Mud, the water company, public utilities company, wants to sell land to build luxury homes. And so this incenses him and others, and this is his first campaign that he's involved. And they run a candidate named, I don't know how you pronounce it, Anya Borgstrom or something, and she was on the list of, how many is it, Brenda? The list of 1,000 supporters. Anyway, she ends up losing, but East Bay Mud gets real cold feet on this deal, backs off. Probably more importantly is out of this, they form Citizens for Regional Recreation and Parks with Dorothy Erskine, who's an activist in San Francisco. This leads to People for Open Space, and then the Greenbelt Alliance in the 90s, which continues today. So you could say he was a founder of these venerable institutions. Another early fight was the Snow Museum Park that I alluded to earlier. Here's a little campaign flyer. He was president of the group, the CRRP, for a number of years. And then this advocacy for San Leandro Bay that we talked about and heard about led to him being appointed to the Bay BCDC. I think he felt a little bad because Sylvia McLaughlin, who is, and Esther, Kay Kerr, Esther Goulet, these women, you know, the famous women who founded Save the Bay, weren't chosen. And he sort of asked about that in the history, and he just, I think he was better connected, perhaps. I think John might have been a pretty good schmoozer. And so, speaking of schmoozing, as we really kind of wind down, we'll play a little Guess Who. This is probably the hardest one. So here's John Sutter. Who's this? Yikes. All right. Thank you. Very good. All right. The rest I don't know that I really need to ask, but I mean, here's John Sutter with Jimmy Carter. I mean, it's just kind of amazing. Not a president, but the governor. Second Governor Brown, right? First Governor Brown appointed him to the bench. I thought I must have skipped over that. Okay, I know people know this. Senator Alan Cranston. He knew Cranston. He met him first at Harvard. And then this may be hard to see. I had to look this one up. All right. All right. Well, I am going to, they asked me to keep this short, so I'm going to come to a close and just end with just a super quick quote from the man himself.
I think we made the East Bay more livable, and the Bay Area is one of them. So now that I think is a significant achievement. Plus, we preserved a lot of land that has special significance.
So, understated, but true. And I want to leave you with this last quote that I pull out of the oral history, and he was talking about what I showed in the beginning about kind of what it takes to succeed, and the persistence and the organization and needing committed people. And at the end, he says something, and he's actually talking about William Penn Mott, but I feel like I want to use his words to describe John Sutter himself. Another thing which I think is important is a touch of inspiration. And I think that John Sutter can provide that for us today. And that's it. So, I don't know, I will turn it back over to OHA, but I
See if
understand.
the audience has any questions.
See if the audience, do you want to come up, Brenda, or? No? Okay, well, you
One
can.
answer prepared.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would just like to add something. I'm Naomi, and I was walking at the...
You were in that Doug McConnell video.
Yeah, and what was funny about it was what's not on camera,
Yeah.
which was that it was kind of a windy day, and the sun was in a certain place, and there was a cameraman, and the idea was to take a bunch of video of John. It was, I guess, when he retired from the board, probably, is when we were doing this. And he kept being upset because Alameda was getting into the background, and he wanted Oakland in the background, and he kept saying, no, I don't want to stand here, I want to stand over here. And the cameraman was very upset because the light direction was different, but he was absolutely immovable, and he was not going to have the Alameda, the private docks is what it was, the private docks of Alameda were not to be shown. He wanted to park in that shot.
I think he achieved it, right? I don't remember seeing Alameda at all.
He was completely determined. There was no way anybody was going to talk him out of it, even if the light was lousy.
Thank you, Naomi. That is awesome. Any questions, comments, things you want to share? No?
I just think that speaks to his long-term vision. That he could see things like that it would matter.
Right.
Then eventually it would matter whether or not it was Oakland or Alameda in the background.
And privately owned, not
Right,
Right, right.
That really got him. He really felt like more of the bay ought to be accessible to the public.
Well, today, Oakland Heritage Alliance and some other advocates were at the Planning Commission. And the reason is because there's a park called Estuary Park, which is supposed to be, it's owned currently by the developer, but part of it, but it is supposed to be public park, and it has been public park, and there's a master plan for it. And all of a sudden, the Brooklyn Basin developer decided he wanted to hang on to 2 or 3 acres of it to put some luxury housing on it. And so today at the Planning Commission, thinking about this event, I said that I was speaking for John Sutter.
You were.
Because I was.
Yeah.
He did a lot of advocating for that, that open space in Brooklyn Basin. That was-
Oh, yeah, and I mean, and he would call you up, and he would say, Naomi, don't you think we should do something about whatever it was? And actually, that was not a question. It was, get busy.
Big round of applause for Dave Zuckerman.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us.
Don't
back.
hesitate to come out to next month, October 29th. It's on a Tuesday when we're having a talk by Judge Charles Smiley speaking about African-American lawyers in Oakland and Alameda County.
And please come on Sunday to the Oakland Scottish Rite Center, 3 o'clock. Partners in Preservation Building Tour. The historian for the Oakland Scottish Rite Center will show the library where Earl Warren and the Nolans and the Pardis used to study, and the old pool room, the smoking room, which is now a lounge where no smoking will take place. And it's, if you haven't seen the Scottish Rite Center, it's amazing. And our Partners in Preservation event will be all afternoon. The official ceremony starts at 5, but there'll be eating and drinking and partying up until that ceremony, so come on down. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight.
Yes.